Welcome everybody to the HolloTalk Podcast. This is Jetpack Nick, and I'm here with a very special guest today, my guy, Kira Shishkin. Say what's up to the people.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be welcomed on the show. Thank you for having me, Nicholas.
Yeah, of course, man. It's been a long time coming, and I want to give a shout out to Leia for coordinating this and putting this together. Shouts out to you. You are amazing, and thank you for listening to the HolloTalk Podcast, of course. Okay, so let's get right into it. So for the people who don't know who you are, can you please let them know who you are, what you're about, and what you do?
Absolutely. I'm Kira Shishkin. I'm the CEO of inform.now, which is America's #1 news by text service. We can get into what that means some more, but that's what I live and breathe, and I love what I do.
Okay, so let's just get right into it. So what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had this realization, and this is very personal to me, that news in America is unbearable, right? Reading news is a very noisy experience. It's a very like hard to swallow experience, and it's so hard to swallow, in fact, that most Americans don't read news, right? And those that do read news that mislead them. And it's just a really unfortunate reality that I think everyone's sort of generally aware of. Some people care less than others, some people are pretty resigned. But we had this idea of, what if we could reimagine news as something that doesn't have sensationalism, doesn't
Right.
have bias, doesn't have this ceaseless solicitation? And what if we could create an experience where we could, help folks be informed without being influenced, without being overwhelmed, without being solicited along the way, without being drained? And that's the mission we're on today.
Okay. All right. So I do want to ask a question about that. So was there like one specific moment or like one specific news report that you saw and was like, okay, this we have to do something here. Like this is ridiculous.
Wow, there are so many of those moments that just kind of piling up until the camel's back broke. But I think there was, a really specific one that just completely enraged me. It was a couple of years ago in San Francisco. I was living on the coast of San Francisco, and I was out of town for the moment. I was more inland in Tahoe, just a couple of hours away, and I heard the news that there was an earthquake warning. I was like, oh, that sounds really concerning. I mean, it's happened before, but I don't know how bad it is. I'm just trying to learn more about it. And then they said, okay, the earthquake is fine, nothing crazy, but there may be a tsunami, right? There's a potential tsunami warning. So me living on the coast, I need to figure out what exactly is going on.
Yes.
And I couldn't get to credible information. Like, it was so simple and so immediate and so urgent, and yet I couldn't just look up online, is there going to be a tsunami in San Francisco or not the next day, right? And so that got me really frustrated. It's like, why can't I just get this information? And everywhere I looked, it was either paywalled, which is this is a crazy thing to paywall. And you have to sign up for an annual subscription to some fancy news you don't really care about.
Right.
And that was really frustrating. So then I kept looking, okay, maybe there's a free source that talks about whether it's going to be a tsunami or not in my home. And all of them were claiming to have information, claiming to have reports, claiming to have the weather, claiming to have some sort of analytics. And then you click into them right after they clickbait you. They had nothing, right? They had nothing, and it was just so frustrating. Like, article after article, link after link, there was no information that I could trust. And it was full of advertisements. Everywhere you looked, there were so many, clickbait, rage bait, doctors hate this one trick, your grandmother, top secret for longevity. And it was just like terrible experience. And I was like, you know what, this ends now, right? I can no longer stand this attention terrorism that's been going on in news media and legacy news media. Like, what if we could build something, or we could build a better way? And so that's what started it personally for me.
Okay, attention terrorism is a a term that I have never heard before, but it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense because, like me being in media, also it's one of those things where, you consume so much media and you get to see like all of the things that are kind of just like shock jockey or things that are like rage baiting and so on and so forth. And it's very, very like draining to consume all of that. And you don't really, I guess, understand until it's too late, like how much of an impact that has on your psyche and just your health, period, mental and physical sometimes. And it's just one of those things where it would be very, very helpful to have outlets like inform.now or the HolloTalk podcast where you can get information or hear stories about things that are really, really helpful or filters through all of the BS that you get generally on any news cycle on any given day. And it just makes things much easier to have these kinds of platforms, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we've, you used to call this the attention economy, where
Hmm.
the eyeballs have become these monetizable assets that
Yeah.
larger companies would sell to each other. And that happened to the news, pretty a long time ago, where as folks stopped paying for news, and they still had to get paid somehow,
Hmm.
a lot of the, virtually all the major news companies have sold the reader and the reader's attention to the advertiser.
Yeah.
And when that sort of betrayal happened, it was this sort of cycle that once it was started, it was really hard to get out of, and we still haven't gotten out of it. And a lot of the major, any I would say at this point, major news publications, if not independent journalism, are completely beholden to advertiser interest because that's the majority of their revenue. That's what they're sort of incentivized to do because that's how they get paid. And I think the marriage of sort of advertisements and advertiser revenue with the journalism reporting and news industry is one of the most terrible combinations of all time.
Yes.
And it's very hard to get out of those incentives because they're very strong. Advertisers are willing to pay a lot of money for our eyeballs, right? So
Mm.
they can target us and sell us based on our behavior things that we really crave. And so, it's very malicious, I think, in so many ways, very invasive. But it's very hard to build something that doesn't follow that template. Right now, if you're in
Right.
media, you're probably going to go the same route, going to do something that is free to consume for the reader or for the audience, but you are monetizing it through some sort of advertiser data or advertiser direct sell experience. And I think it's been long enough of that that people are seeing that for what it is and are so frustrated that they're yearning for a media source that doesn't harass them, that
Mhm.
doesn't constantly nag them to buy, to click, to feel enraged. And so we're leaning into that feeling as frustrated millennials, as frustrated Gen Z. Folks are so tired of this.
Yes. Okay. So I do have a question. So how do you walk that fine line between like being too in your face, like with just news versus I guess kind of like pushing that news and like, no, this is stuff that you just kind of need to see, and versus being like very overbearing with just stuff or just headlines and talking points and so on and so forth. How do you walk that fine line with inform.now?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the main sort of, lines that we walk and that we have to sort of be careful about because otherwise we're going to perpetuate a behavior that we're looking to cancel.
Exactly.
And I think we do it through like a multiple approaches because we this has been by design from the very beginning is how can we give people their attention back while still keeping them informed so that they have the dignity of making up their own opinion, the
Yep.
dignity of feeling informed about the world without being vulnerable to propaganda or being vulnerable to social media or being vulnerable to other people's secondhand and third-hand opinions.
Mhm.
And I think especially now that we're going through a very transformative time in the U.S., independent thinking is really important, and it's never been more important than right now. And so, you know, how do we sort of balance that? I would say maybe three things. Number one is we don't believe that reading news all the time, 24/7, is good for you. I don't think that's actually how you stay informed.
Right.
Reading a lot, reading more, isn't necessarily, you know, isn't necessarily knowing more, right? Reading more is not necessarily knowing more. And I think that's what we're trying to sort of correct, is you can know a lot if you're reading the right things and they're presented to you in the right respectful way. And so what does that look like literally in our product? Number one, we don't do breaking news, right? So we've purposely distanced ourselves from this kind of like alert format of like something happened, right? Trump, slipped, and then huge pictures and then articles and all these threads and the commentary, and everyone's talking about it, and then the next update is, okay, now Trump got up,
Right,
you know,
right, right.
and another, threads, commentary, and then update number three, Trump is fine, right? And so it's like, why did we even react to any of this noise of Trump slipping, falling, getting up, right? When none of this mattered, right? This was not important. And I think this, I'm using a very simple kind of example, but
Right, 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 right.
because the entirety of like the news, what landscape, something happens and we don't really know what it means just yet. Like it's just such a developing story that if you were to get an update on that in real time, breaking like live, you would have to get every update since, because the story is still developing. And no one
Right.
has time to do that. It's extremely exhausting, it's draining experience. So we don't do breaking news. We sort of let the dust settle. So we know what is both most important from a period of 24 hours or 12 hours or 3 days. And we know what the facts are because they've been verified, they've been confirmed, we've read the primary sources, we've seen what the truth looks like. So we're not sort of vulnerable ourselves to, unfinished, incomplete, half-reported information.
Right.
So we don't do breaking news. That's sort of number one most important thing. The 2 and 3 are much simpler. We only ever text once a day. We don't want to do this multiple times. We prioritize. Part of our work is prioritizing the news, and so we're not going to, bombard you with them. We're going to choose what's most important for you to know. I'm going to focus on that. And then 3, very simple. We don't do weekends. Now, our Monday briefings always cover the whole weekend, but we just don't believe you need to read news on the weekend. So please don't, and we're not going to let you do that.
So just go enjoy your weekend. We'll get to you on Monday.
Exactly. You're not really missing anything. Saturday and Sunday, don't worry about it. Have time with your family. Monday briefing is going to cover everything, so you'll be back on the force. You'll know what's going on, but you don't have to pay attention every day, 24/7.
Right, right. Yeah, you got to have some time to step away from things and get a clear mind, and try to take in what you've read or saw, and so on and so forth, because it's very hard to take in things and process it and analyze it when you're constantly taking in new information. So that we appreciate that. So okay, so I do have a question about, like, I guess how you go about filtering what is factual information versus what is fake news, as they say, or like irrelevant news or biased news. How do you go about filtering that into what you send out to the people through inform.now as factual news?
Absolutely. I think there's sort of two questions, right? In your question, one is how do we prioritize, and the second one is sort of related, but like what do we consider important? And so I think, and maybe answer the second one first, right? Is what do we consider important? We focus on world news, not
Okay.
just US news. And so we have this belief that, being a global citizen is something we all, should be. We live in a very globalized world. And you would be surprised, but like you can keep up with the entirety of the world without being overwhelmed,
Right.
considering that you're reading the right sources. And so what we do is not just US based. We focus a lot on the US because a lot of things are happening there, and that's our primary customer is the American. But we also give you the coverage and the view of Europe, of Africa, of Asia, of Latin America. We show you the whole world, and we look through the whole world for the most life-changing experiences. So what we think of it is what the question we ask ourselves essentially every 24 hours is, what changed the world today? And that's the question. right? And how do we break that down? Primarily is how much does a certain event affect how many people, right? And so if it's something that's, resulted in death, obviously that's a huge tragedy and it's an enormous event.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was a minor event in a small part of the world, for example, there was a huge bus crash and everybody, you know, died, in Vietnam, it's a tough situation, right?
Right.
And it's a terrible tragedy, but it doesn't change the world, right? It doesn't change the world as much as the European Union retaliating tariffs, with Trump, with the U.S., and maybe China creating a new defense pact partnership with Australia. I'm just, making things up at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, right, right.
We're looking at things that are really changing the trajectory of the world. And we're always looking at, is this world changing, life changing events? If so, then we focus on that. And so that's sort of like how do we, what do we think is important? We
Mm-hmm.
focus on the world, we focus on the world changing events. Um, Number two part of the question, right, is essentially how do we actually do the prioritization? And to accomplish that, we actually read all the news of the world. Now, obviously, there's a lot of non-credible news. There's a lot of noise out there. We don't look at social media. We don't look at you know clearly biased, stated biased news
Mm-hmm.
sources, but we do look at reporters. You
And,
know,
and when you say we, you mean just the inform.now team.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay. Good.
our team, our
Continue.
company, our organization. We look at the some collection of credible journalists,
Mm-hmm.
or rather, we really look to reporters, not journalists, because to us, journalists are folks who write, and reporters are those who are in the field collecting evidence. And so we look more to the reporters rather than to the writer journalists,
Okay.
and that's kind of where we source a lot of the things that we couldn't get ourselves.
Okay.
A growing share of our information actually comes from primary sources, and that's a really big focus. So at any given point, if you're looking at our text, easily two-thirds, if not more, of that text is collected directly from primary sources. So we don't even need a reporter. We don't need a journalist in a mediating capacity between us
Mm-hmm.
and the truth. We're
Yeah.
just able to go directly to the central bank, to the White House, to the Bill of Congress, to the Supreme Court, to the government of the European Union, the government of Malaysia, whatever it is in question. We have our own sort of system of connections to primary sources that allows us to get the truth from the horse's mouth. And so we have a huge affinity or loyalty to the primary sources. And when we can't get the truth from primary sources because it's not live yet, maybe there is no primary source. I mean, it's the middle of a war zone and there is no ground truth available. Then we go to reporters and we aggregate that sort of insight, not across one or two, but everybody who's written about the issue. And we try to figure out what are the common agreed upon points that make it clear that these are the ground truths. And that's sort of the process we go through to figure out what we're going to talk about on a topic and what's worth surfacing.
Okay. So for the people who may not understand exactly what you said, so like are the primary sources that you go to, and how do you get your news specifically from those primary sources on those particular stories that you push out?
Yeah, I mean, the the way we think of the sort of news industry is there's many different roles. There's a huge hierarchy of writers. There's a
Mm-hmm.
very junior writer. There's the senior journalist of the Wall Street Journal, and in that whole kind of hierarchy, there's a distinction between the journalist who is sort of a creative writer type
Mm-hmm.
journalist, right? So maybe that's a New York Times satire writer, or the New York Times, or the New Yorker lifestyle writer,
Right.
right? They're not really operating with factual information. They're writing about things. They're being kind of creative writers with the hat of a journalist, and that happens obviously in the clear areas of lifestyle and celebrity gossip and
Mm-hmm.
satire, etc. But it also happens with news as well. When we talk about a journalist collecting information from reporters and writing stories about them. right? And analyzing, interpreting, offering a digest of a certain kind, offering a perspective so that people can understand what's going on. So that's sort of the journalist writer profile. And we don't
Okay.
really look at that because they provide an opinion, they provide a perspective, they provide a point of view, and we're interested in removing a point of view from news altogether. So the type of character in the industry that we focus on and we empower is the primary reporter. And that's the type of journalist that is in the field, right? In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Israel, right? In Ukraine, on Wall Street, in the trading house, in the
Mhm.
on stock exchanges, right? They're live on the ground as the change or the event is happening, and they're talking to witnesses, they're talking to the primary actors, and they're collecting evidence, information, facts that then get sort of sent over to the rest of the ecosystem. So we try to capture you know, our information at that sort of mother source before it starts getting digested and reinterpreted. And a lot of people don't know this, but the news industry actually, drinks their, or consumes their facts from a very limited set of resources. There's, a handful. There's less than five kind of, mother reporting
Mhm.
agencies that collect information around the world, and then they actually pass them on and sell that information to branded publications, which is
Okay.
when you get, CNN, CNBC, New Yorker, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. That's when they start getting their sort of turn at taking the
Mhm.
facts and transforming them into interpretation.
Okay.
We don't get our facts from interpretation. We get our facts from the original reporters.
Okay. And do you like personally talk to these reporters around the world to get this particular information?
A personal conversation is not always necessary or really possible given the speed of how news are
Right.
moving. We do have relationships and we do, have reporter connections, but the vast majority of how we do this is technological. We look at, the writing of these primary reporters and we read them through our technology, right?
Mhm.
It's a mix of technology and talent that gets us to the credibility and the accuracy that we have. What we essentially do is we're able, through our technology, read all the news of the world, right,
Mhm.
from these primary reporters. And so, to just name some specific sources that we pay a lot of attention to, these are what we call, or what the industry calls, the newswire sources.
Mhm.
It's the Associated Press, right? It's the AFP, it is Bloomberg, it is Reuters. There's a couple of others, but these are the muscle, the fact muscle of the industry,
Mhm.
where they're collecting primary sort of source information. They're collecting, on the ground evidence information.
And then they send it out to all of the other branded networks and publications, so on and so forth.
Exactly.
Got you. Okay.
And,
So,
and
oh, go ahead.
that
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that work. I mean, just to name it so that the listener knows what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. No, I was going to ask that for sure, so that way the people knew who
Yeah.
those entities were.
And that's just called the news wires. Like no, that's the news wire service, which is the kind of the originating source of truth for all these publications. Because a lot of them, right, a lot of the journalists and the big brands that we think of, they don't actually have their own reporting muscle.
Mhm.
They have creative writers on staff that take information that's sold to them and they regurgitate it, interpret it, and sort of give their opinion. But hey, man, I don't care about your opinion. I want to give people the facts and the power of facts. And we want to say less so people can make
Mhm.
up their own minds. And we don't need your interpretation. Your interpretation is the reason we live in a polarized country.
Okay, so staying on like on this kind of topic, right? So for you specifically or your team specifically, how do you guys kind of filter through like all of those news stories, even if they come from those publications that you spoke about that are reputable and they send it to each publication from their on ground or in-person people to gather these stories? How do you then take those stories, filter through them, and still make the distinction that this isn't biased or this is factual enough in order to send out to the people to read?
Well, And I think we're lucky to have you as a reader. And you've seen what we do. We say
Yeah.
less. We say a lot less than what people think of when they think of news. Like in America, when people think of news, what actually comes to their mind is news commentary, right? Is
Hmm.
people saying something about an event, but then they don't just stop there, right? There is a longer essay. There's another paragraph. There's another paragraph, and then then they're bringing in this person, and they're talking to someone in the street. Like, how is it in the street? Oh, it's good. How back to you? And it's this cadence of kind of like, expanding the topic
Hmm.
beyond what it should be. Like, just tell me what happened, where did it happen, what's the relevant context, and leave me alone, right? And so for us, what we do is we focus just on the essentials. We look at what, where, and when, and we don't really take the liberty of saying more. That part is up to the reader. That's for them to make up their mind. And so, I'm hopeful this is a good answer to your question, and I'm not, being too vague, but we essentially focus on the what, where, and when.
Hmm.
And then the rest is up to the thought of the reader, right? We don't really do this talking head service on TV
Right.
where people are telling you what to think and how to feel, and is this a terrible thing or is it an amazing thing? We don't do that because we don't believe that's news. That's news commentary, and we don't do news commentary.
Got you. And that's a very big distinction between the two. Definitely a very big distinction between the two, because you, like I said, anybody who is watching this, I'm sure people, especially right now, like they watch the news and watch CNBC or watch Fox News, and you get to hear all of the talking heads, talk about the different things that's going on in the world. But each of those entities, or whatever entity that I maybe didn't name, has their own, like, I guess, favoritism or their own biases, and they lead with those things, and people who share those biases or share those opinions or thoughts gravitate to those particular platforms. Whereas, like you said, with inform, you kind of just cut that out and just say this is what the facts are, and if you happen to land on this side or you happen to land on this side, then that's up to you, but these in the middle are just what the facts are.
Exactly. We're essentially, on a mission to give the power of the news wire, which is not really accessible. Like most people don't even know what it is.
Right.
Right? I feel like to a lot of listeners, this is the first time they'll hear of this dynamic that news companies actually buy their news from a news agency, which is another name for the news wire service.
Hmm.
Like we're looking to give the power of the facts from news wires directly to the everyday person, the everyday American, because it's been strange
Yeah.
that so much is democratized, so many services, so much access is democratized in this country, except for facts. Facts are still controlled by this, how should I categorize them, a conglomerate complex, right? An oligopoly perhaps
Hmm.
of news companies that are regurgitating news for you. And news commentary is free. News
Yeah.
commentary is abundant and it's everywhere. But to actually get news pure, news itself, it's virtually impossible.
It is. Okay, so I guess it's like I guess to help people like understand or like unpack this or whatever. Like, do you have like an example of a story that was kind of tricky? Like you had all the facts from your person, but it was still kind of tricky to say like, okay, this is exactly what it was. Like whatever happened wasn't black and white. Do you have an example of a story like that?
Well, I feel like this is a daily experience,
Okay.
but anything, I mean, anything that relates to Trump, right? Anything that Trump does, one side starts praising, right, and saying this is the best thing for America. This is unbelievable. He's a genius, right? And we know what those publications are. I mean, Fox is one of them, right? We're looking at similar, tendencies happening with a lot of other publications that have sort of become more right leaning and Trump leaning since the election. So I think Washington Post has been taking steps in that direction, right? And so there's praise going on, right? And then you have anything that Trump does, and then immediately gets criticized at the same time by publications that are not Trump friendly, that have not sort of bent the knee or have always been much more Democrat, much more blue in their own right. And so right away, you can't really assess the action, right, of Trump, for example, meeting the Chinese president, which happened, just last week. You can't really assess that. Is this a great thing? Is it a terrible thing? Because right away you're being told one side is screaming this, one side is screaming that.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to sort of like read something without being influenced while you're reading it. And so, the way we would report on that, the way we did report on that, is we would just say very clearly, right? Trump and Chinese President Xi met for the first time in 6 years. They agreed to reduce China tariffs to 47%, which is 18% less than the previous threat of 57%. As Beijing pledges fentanyl crackdown, soybean purchases from the US, and a 1 year pause on rare earth export curbs. Right? That's what happened. That's exactly what happened. Right? And then we don't tell you this is a terrible thing. We don't tell you this is an amazing thing. We just tell you what actually happened. Now you get to make up your own mind how you feel about it. If you think it's a good thing, if you think it's a bad thing, if you want to read some more, we make that easy for you. We don't taint your point of view.
Okay. So I do want to know, just based off of like you being in this industry and consuming news the way that you do you see um like any common like tricks or tactics that news reporters or news publications use to make their biased news go viral?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things, right? It's anger and fear. If
Okay.
you and I think an exercise that I used to do as in the early days of building informed and sort of learning more about the problem. If you just look, I dare anyone, I encourage anyone to just look at the front page of, it could be a website too, right? It doesn't have to
Hmm.
be, physical copy. But if you just look at the front page of any major publication, right? Look at, for example, at NBC, or you look at CNN, you know, you look at anything across the board. Just look at that page, and without reading anything in particular, just look at the headlines in like the first sentence, and tell me what feeling they're looking to provoke. And it's these two things: it's fear and anger. And how are they doing this? They're saying either, hey, this is this scary thing that's happening, this can happen to you, you should be in fear, you should be alerted, or hey, you won't believe what this guy did, this
Hmm.
politician is lying to us, there's this risk of fraud, like you should be angry, you should be angry. And those two feelings, they just don't go old. They get us every time. They get the reader every time, because we are human, and we tend to experience fear and anger very profoundly, and these are strong emotions that are memorable and that provoke a response, right? In the world of like yellow journalism, which is another way of saying, now it's clickbait journalism,
Hmm.
it's rage bait journalism, is they're trying to provoke these feelings. And you can tell any story through that lens to get that sort of response and reaction. But frankly, I think that's unethical. I think that's, as informed.now, we as a team think that is the problem. That is why people have stopped reading news as
Hmm.
a mass. And people that still do are very vulnerable to, they're very provoked by news. They have this emotional, strong responses. Well, this isn't an accident. This is designed. This is by design. And I think that's incredibly toxic. I think the industry, as it is now, is extremely toxic.
Okay, so what, like, in your opinion, why do you think fear and anger are the two things that people tend to try to manipulate for the consumers or the readers of the news that they put out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of research saying that we as humans experience negative emotions stronger and more memorably than positive emotions, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And I think anger and fear are one of, they're the strongest of the negative emotions. I think alongside, they're really easy, right? Like guilt is something that's harder to evoke, right? Shame is harder to evoke because these are very personal experiences. It's
Right.
hard to tell a story that is going to evoke guilt or shame or something like that. And I don't think those are such motivating. They're kind of, more, they're feelings that make you retract rather than, provoke you to some sort of action. And I think anger and fear are also very social. right? Because when we're
Mhm.
angry, it feels good to also get to be in anger with others, right? To feel fear with others, because then you're like, okay, well, I'm angry about this thing. I'm gonna go tell my friend, and we're gonna be angry together, right? I want him to be angry with me because I want him to agree with me, right?
Mhm.
Because this is messed up, right? And so I think there are also very social feelings, both fear and anger, right?
Right.
Fear, you feel fear for your family, right? It's like I'm afraid. I worry about my daughter, and so I want to think about, is she safe? Is everything okay? Hey, have you seen this? Right? And these are sort of like social, viral, easy to provoke negative feelings. Uh,
Mhm.
that's, I think, part of the reason that they get us every time.
It's funny like that you saying that because I'm sitting here thinking like, well, damn, is there any like like positive like social feelings that people have? Like, are we all just collectively happy at once, or like, is there anything like that? Because to be honest, like, just thinking about how I've seen things unfold and transpire, being in constant fear or constant anger, just individually, let alone collectively, that is just very, very taxing on all fronts. And I guess there's pockets of I guess the nation or the world that can capitalize off of those moments of anger or fear. Like I guess for instance, like the stock market, they say that when there's a level of fear in the stock market, stocks tend to go up or go down very drastically because you fear the market going one way or another. And then depending on what side of the fence you're on, you can either make a whole lot of money in a fearful society in the stock market, or you can lose a lot of money in a fearful society with the stock market. Just using that as an example, but I digress. Do you want to talk more about just the idea of how you can take fear and anger and I guess turning that into a different feeling, or is it only those two feelings that people kind of attach themselves to and use to pump out news articles or not even just news articles, any kind of media that people consume?
Well, I think I was more responding to your question around like, what does this toxic legacy news industry do today?
Mhm.
But I don't believe that, that's this huge commentary on our human nature. I think
Okay.
we're very trainable. We're very sort of, we're creatures of habit, but our habit and our behavior patterns can fully be retrained and rewritten and reprogrammed. And just the fact that they're programmed right now to accept and put up with an industry of, an information industry that provokes fear and anger, just like that, it can be written to react positively and virally to much more positive experiences. So I totally believe that this isn't some testimony to our human nature. This is an unfortunate accident. It's an unfortunate outcome that we right now live,
Mhm.
with an industry that thrives on fear and anger. I think we can totally reinvent and reimagine this industry and how folks consume media, and that's very much what we're in the mission of. Is like our whole goal is saying, what, you can actually read news and get informed without any emotional um, input, any input, emotional reaction. It can be
Mhm.
actually a very boring experience. Like news should be boring, right? You just read it, takes you a minute, and then you don't think about it. You don't feel angry. You don't feel sad. You don't feel fearful for your family. You
Right.
just know what's going on. You can make informed decisions, but it doesn't have to be this, it's not like you watched a sad movie just now. That's
Mhm.
for the evening. It shouldn't be for your
Right.
morning. It would be hard to start your morning like that every time. And so, that's one belief, is I
Mhm.
think we don't need what we have, like this emotional strong pull. And two is almost going in the opposite direction. I do think, and we're exploring this opportunity internally to create a new service. And this is something that we're currently sort of workshopping and exploring and
Mhm.
beta testing, to have a what we call good news only. It's a service that only focuses on good news across, science, technology, politics, everything that you would think of as important pillars of society,
Mhm.
but it just focuses on the good stuff, right? And so it's trying to, almost mock and confront this reality of like fear and anger mongering.
Right.
Instead of say, what if we just create a news company that only focus on good news? And so that's something we're thinking about as well. I think it's a habit that we can also encourage in people. And I think people will be happy to have that option.
Of course. If you could just filter out all of the negativity that you see on a daily basis, I think a lot of people would buy into that ideology of, okay, yeah, I want to see some happy stuff now. I'm tired of seeing all of the things about, people's lives falling apart each and every day, or just all of the negative and horrible things that are happening each and every day, and not just the country but the world itself. So and it's funny that you even say that you mentioned the whole idea of, I guess, making a news thing of just all good news, because I was going to ask you, like, do you think it's possible to just give news, or even just media itself, like movies, television, books, so on and so forth, without people invoking emotion from the media that they consume? Like, is that a possibility that you can make media without invoking emotion from people?
I think the way we've been doing it is sort of the best attempt we've seen. I mean, that's why we've set out on this journey, is to to present a best faith, best foot forward effort
Hmm.
at creating news without emotion. News that is almost clinically dry and concise and minimal, where
Right.
it just informs and does nothing else. So I feel like you know you know from at least what I've seen and what I'm aware of, inform.now is the kind of preeminent emotionless news effort, right?
Mm.
Or effort at creating news that doesn't provoke you in any way. Um, and so I do think it's possible. I think if you talk to a lot of our users, and you're among them as well, so I'm curious about
Mhm.
your take. You know, I don't think our text provoke emotion, and that's at least the goal. I don't know if we always get it right, but we're always aiming to not leave people enraged or angry or sad or any of the above. On the side, we're cooking up potentially a new brand idea, which we're going to possibly call Optimist News, which
Okay.
is essentially just good news updates. But to the question about like, can it be emotionless? I think that's what Informed Now is.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned like me being a subscriber to inform.now, and I guess in my experience, like, it's exactly what you're saying. Like, it's literally, these are the facts. This is what it is. I don't stand on this side of of the tracks, or this side of the tracks. This is just what it is. And 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 he definitely he meant it when he said there's no updates on Saturdays or Sundays. Because I checked my phone, I was like, there's nothing. And then as soon as Monday came, I got flooded. so so yes, my experience so far has been really, really cool. Like, talking to you, obviously, and you explaining what it is, from the primary source, all puns intended, what we mentioned earlier about getting information from primary sources. But but like you said, it's exactly what it is. And what you said it is what it is. Nothing but facts. That's all it is. And I think for me, like I said, consuming as much media as I do, obviously being in media, it's very important to just know what things are, and not what this person thinks it is, or what this person thinks it is, because it's very hard to get an informed opinion of your own informed opinion on what these things are, because you're being influenced by somebody over here or somebody over here. Whereas I just kind of just want to know what's going on, period, and then figure out what to do next on my own vacation, instead of listening to you or being influenced by you.
Exactly. And I think it's a forgotten art, right? To just get what you asked for and nothing else. I feel like
Mm,
right now it's a silly analogy, but I feel like in the world of media
mm,
and social media, obviously left and right, but also entertainment media left and right. But we're looking at news media, right, which is like a specific subgenre of the media world.
Right.
I think across all of them, this is happening, but especially news media, which is it's sort of like least acceptable. You don't just get what you order. You don't just say, you don't just say, hey, can I have a burger? And they don't just give you a burger. When you say, can I have a burger? They come to you with fries, with steak, with a cheesecake, with 2 pounds of beef. They come with sausages.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, wait a second, but I just ordered a burger.
Right.
And now I'm full of your shit. And like, I just wanted a burger. This is some sort of a violation that you gave me so much more than I bargained for.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I don't really feel blessed by it. I don't really feel like benefited by it. I actually feel overwhelmed, drained, and sort of fooled, but in like a weird way, because I still got the burger, but I also got all the stuff that I didn't ask for, that I don't even like, that
Right.
I wasn't even expecting. And I feel like that's, as silly as this analogy is, like that's the experience of reading news. You don't just get what you came for. You get alongside with that, a little pop-up,
Mm-hmm.
follow this other topic. You get a little, ticker of a stock market. You get this like moving bar of current sensationalism. You get these, advertisements of your grandma's buying this, your sister's buying this.
Mm-hmm.
TikTok ad. There is some sort of a terrible clickbait ad for, what is it, like a car part? Like they sell the most random things on the news sort of website, right? And then there's this constant pop-ups of like, wait a second, pay us right now. You should pay us for an annual subscription so we can remove all these things, which we still won't remove, but we'll reduce them. And like subscribe to this other thing. What about the crossword? What about the puzzle? What about the trivia? Don't go anywhere. Here's all that you didn't order. And I think that's messed up, right? That is, by the way, what I refer to as attention terrorism.
So we have to like make this an actual phrase because it makes so much sense. So much sense. Like when you really think about it, it's really attention terrorism for sure. So I do have a question. I actually have two questions. So kind of going back in our conversation, we mentioned like with you catering to world news specifically, things that would affect the world, not just like local things or just things that might have happened here or there or whatever. Like is it all just political news or like or do you determine like other news that's non-political to be important to push out to people as world news?
Absolutely. And I know you've seen a lot of the range of our coverage,
Mhm.
but we really don't have a thematic like this is a political you know you know coverage. We don't really
Mhm.
have that sort of focus at all. We focus on the most world-changing news, but that is sometimes politics, sometimes it's economy,
Mhm.
sometimes technology, sometimes it's healthcare, sometimes it's cultural, right? If there's a revolution going on, if there's the No Kings protest,
Right.
that's a cultural movement. I think it's a social movement. It's not necessarily political, though obviously it relates to politics.
Mhm. Right, right.
Technological updates, scientific breakthroughs. We focus on world-changing phenomena, and it happens to be political a lot of the time.
Mhm.
So that sort of like is probably the most represented category. But we cut across every category, from innovation, science, technology, cultural, politics, society, economy, business, corporations,
Yeah.
things of all those kinds. And so we're not a political news outlet by any means.
Okay.
We are very much a significant news outlet, right? Important news, like, and that's what we focus on. But we take pride in the range of our coverage, which covers across all those topics I mentioned on a daily basis. So it's not
Yeah.
like one day is all politics, one day is all tech. On the contrary, it's whatever's most important, and we always rank that, in the bullets that we share. So number one, number two, number three,
Mhm.
it can really range from politics, science, technology, culture, politics again, right? Maybe it's military as a last point. And so, Yeah, we rotate through categories based on significance.
Okay, and like I said, the reason I asked that question is because I didn't want the listeners or the viewers to I guess take away that informed is a political based thing, because obviously, like you said, like a lot of the information that you would be pushing out to people would be political because that is generally the world changing information that people need to know is about politics or what's going on within the political atmosphere. So that's why I asked that question. So thank you
Totally.
for explaining that properly to the people.
All for it.
So I do have another question as well. So is there like a group of people or like a group of readers that you kind of have a tough time catering to? Like people that just be like, I don't even care about this. Like I want to stay over here and listen to my biased news. I don't care
Yeah.
about these facts.
We don't really target those people, right? Like we don't even see them because
Oh,
they're not attracted to us in the first place, right?
right.
It's like, they're happy with their own echo chamber. They're happy with
Mhm.
their own, journalist as a creative writer. They're happy with their own Fox News, whatever that may be, right? Like they're not really looking for a solution like ours. So we don't get to see them very often. We really sort of attract people that are frustrated with the news industry, but they still want a solution that can keep them informed. And so it's pretty self-selecting in many ways. I think in instances that it still happens, right? We still have folks that come to us and they're like, "Hey, I kind of think this could be fun, but it's not doing the things I want." Who are those people? Number one, it's folks that want breaking news. We
Right.
don't do breaking news. If you want breaking news, you should live in front of a TV, right? We don't really cater to that. And so folks that are so junkied around sort of news that want to have
Hmm.
updates multiple times a day, we don't serve them well because we don't focus on that. The philosophy that we embody of like news mindfulness
Hmm.
is not what they're looking for. They're looking for a little bit of a news overload, which is just the rest of the industry. So that's one type that we don't serve that need very well. I think
Hmm.
number two is like we're not local. We are global, and
Right.
so we cater to and we attract Americans and Americans and Canadians all over nationwide,
Hmm.
all countries that see themselves as global citizens, right? So Americans that see themselves as global citizens. And it's a lot of people, and it's a growing number of people as well. But if you're someone who doesn't care about what's going on in Europe, what's
Hmm.
going on between Europe and America, what's happening in Africa, what's happening in Asia, if you don't care, you're not going to get benefit from our news. You should be reading hyper localized news from your local radio station of like, store next to you got robbed, terrible thing. Like
Hmm.
that's a different category of news that we don't really play in just yet. We
Right.
might in the future. We might, go into hyper localism and start with a few locations and develop that offering. But right now, we are very set on, serving the American who sees herself as a global citizen.
Okay, so I do want to ask a question, and you can answer this or that, but so the focus on world news, right? Does that stem from you being as worldly as you are because you aren't from the United States, even though you live here, you're not from the United States, right?
That's right.
Okay, where are you from?
I am Ukrainian Israeli, so I was born and raised in Ukraine
Hmm.
to a also immigrant parents that were actually immigrating from Russia.
Right.
And then I actually came of age and spent a lot of my life in Israel before coming to the East Coast and then to Midwest and then to the West Coast of the
Hmm.
US. So yeah, I think that comes from like an international upbringing. But if anything, it gave me this conviction that, hey, the world is super interconnected,
Hmm.
right? I mean, I'm almost, apart from my own story, I'm an example that the world isn't, we don't just live in our own corners. Things are moving around.
Right.
People are crossing borders. People are influencing each other across borders, right? Like China is having more influence on the US than anything within the US right now, right? And so we live in a very globalized, interconnected world. It would be silly to think that it doesn't matter what's going on around us more globally.
Especially
But
with social media too. Yeah,
completely.
exactly. Because social media kind of just shrunk the world. Like the world was this big, and then once social media came, it was like this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, man. Yeah, so like I said, I wanted to ask that question because, like, obviously, like I knew this, but the viewers and the listeners didn't know this necessarily. So I thought that it might be one of those things where your experiences like around the world may have contributed to you wanting to focus your content on world news more specifically than just national news, like within the United States, so on and so forth.
yeah. I think that's comes from this conviction that I've
Mhm.
gained and earned through my sort of journey so far. But I think also, if we were to look at the US like national news coverage itself,
Mhm.
like I don't know that to a person that only has a minute to read news each day, which is again who we serve. We serve a
Right.
person who is very busy because maybe they're the boss and they have no free time because they're so occupied.
Mhm.
Or it's the opposite. They're very early in their career. And maybe they're in a place where they're not in the most prestigious role. They don't have a lot of time because their time is not their own. And so we're looking at folks who don't have a lot of time, right? I don't know if we were to look at national news coverage, if it's all worth like a minute of your time, because we would
Right.
still take the prioritization approach. And like there's actually a very limited amount of important things that are happening in like national updates. A lot of it is drama, right? A lot of it is he said, she said, the senator was mean to this congressman, and now they're fighting, and then the votes are being counted, but they're not finished counting them.
Mhm.
But we're going to count more votes tomorrow. It's just like, no, none of this is that important. There's only a few things that really matter, and we're always going to capture them because we do have a kind of an American, not American first, because we are really truly global and based on significance, but a lot of things that happen in a national American politics are world level importance. And so we're always going to capture sort of the most important things from national news and still give the world. Because if we're to just do national, a lot of stuff wouldn't be that important. A lot of
Right.
that isn't really worth a minute of, like, for a person who only reads a minute a day, a lot of the stuff that's national drama isn't really worth your time. That's at least our thesis.
Right, right. No, I completely understand for sure. So, I do have another question. So, I kind of liken this to how they say like therapists need a therapist because you take on so much like information from other people. You being in this space of dealing with news and obviously having to consume news, how do you kind of go about disconnecting from taking in so much news and not being totally like cynical about what you're taking in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I appreciate this. No
For
one's
sure.
checked in on me in this regard
Yeah,
recently.
I'm gonna check on you. This is actually one of the things that I do. I try to promote mental health, especially now it being November, which is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. So,
Yeah.
I want to check on you, my brother.
Well, thank you. I think maybe two things. One is I see through all the bullshit in the sense of
Mhm.
like I can see just based on like what we're doing in this kind of denoising process, I can see a lot of the news is not real. Like a lot of the sensationalism, a lot of the dramatization, a lot of the drama is just not real. So I think I've gotten to a place of tolerance of just like I can see a lot of very sensationalized, very trigger news um, content and just sort of ignore it because
Mhm.
I can see that this is not what it's made out to be, right? So I think that sort of keeps me safe because I've just have a lot of experience looking at stuff that has been sensationalized to the nth degree,
Right.
and yet I know this topic is not what it's made out to be. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part is um, I do try to follow my own recipe
Mhm.
prescription. I don't read news on the weekends, and that's really important to me. Is like I have hard reset days where I just don't touch it,
Right.
and I think that helps a lot. I think if you're in a news cycle like 24/7, that's when it gets to you. I think
Yeah.
that's when it's sort of you get really stuck in it. And I'm very strict and disciplined around like, hey, 2 or sometimes 3 days a week. I don't read anything. Like it's not going anywhere. I think that's the other thing is like news not going anywhere. You think it's urgent, it's super time sensitive. Like no, it isn't. Like you can read it 3 days later. Nothing's gonna happen, right? It's not like you're gonna do anything about it anyway. And and so I mean sometimes you do, but
No, right. But more times than not, you don't.
yeah, sometimes you don't. Like it's not like you're gonna re-elect, the president, but
Hmm.
sometimes there are obviously that's part of the work we do. There are news that are gonna change some of your decisions in your daily
Of
life. So
course.
I don't want to, undervalue that. That's sort of the whole point of the operation.
Hmm.
But I think the more personal answer, apart from just the news, like discipline and habits, is I watch cartoons, and that helps me just consume content that just gets me so relaxed and so like in suspension of disbelief and just being able to like feel this like childlike comfort again.
Hmm.
And I think that more than anything helps me undo the damage from
Right.
new content.
Okay, so let's get into it. What's your favorite cartoon or your go-to cartoon?
Wow, you heard of Tom and Jerry?
Of course.
No, I'm messing. I'm not watching Tom and Jerry. I mean, sometimes the old stuff, but right now I'm really into anime. I've always been really into anime,
Hmm.
and there's a new movie. It's an anime film, so it's not a series. Series is too much for me. I can't watch it.
Hmm.
Called Mononoke on
Okay.
Netflix. And so I've been very consumed by it because they're doing some interesting things visually that are just very, very tricky. And
Hmm.
I love animation that is capable of really kind of confusing you, dazzling you a little bit.
Right.
And that really helps me sort of reverse um, some of the seriousness of news content.
Yeah, I mean, and man, like I said, you got to have an outlet to kind of just get that all of that stuff off of your shoulders. Like, yeah, it's just one of those things. And for me, cartoons is a dope thing. It's something that you could just sit back and mindlessly look at and laugh at, so on and so forth. And anime. Who doesn't like anime? And if you don't like anime, what's wrong with you?
I think animation generally, anime including, but I'm also really into like old, like antique animation from like
Okay.
100 years ago, right? 80 years ago, from like the early days of animation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated with that stuff, and so
What what about that do you like?
I just think people had stories and people had imaginations, back, 40 years ago,
Yeah.
years ago, and they were really interesting because these were people that were so different from us, right? People that were alive
Mhm.
years ago were completely different species, given that they have not seen so many of the things that now we take for granted as part of life, right? Like have a hard time finding a person who doesn't know what TikTok is, but there
Okay.
used to be a world where there was no resemblance of anything like TikTok, right? And so I think those people are very different from us. Like our ancestors of just 40 years ago, 50
Mhm.
years ago, right? Which could really just be like the young versions of our parents, right?
Right.
Young versions of our grandparents. I think they've had fascinating stories to tell, to share, and they didn't have the cinematic capabilities in terms of filming them. Like right now, you
Mhm.
can film anything, right? Especially with AI, you can really film anything. And the way they would tell their stories when it defied their ability, their cinematic ability, is through animation. Because with animation, you can tell any story that you want. You just need to draw it. And I think it's sort of like a window in the thinking and the thought of that time. And I think it's archaeologically,
Mhm.
anthropologically, historically curious. And some of the stories are terrific.
Okay. So you mentioned AI, right? I'm very curious to know, and I think a lot of the listeners will be curious to know because AI is such a big thing now. Like, and people are using it at a astronomical rate, and a lot of people are catching on and beginning to use it as well. How within the news cycles and things like that, how do you decipher things from like, real stuff versus AI or deep fakes and stuff like that? How do you go about deciphering those things, or even maybe using AI for your benefit and or for the good, I should say?
Absolutely. I mean, in our case, we use AI at core to our operations because
Okay.
we kind of think it as two ways, right? There is folks that are, and I want to distinguish AI from like deep fakes because like that's
Hmm.
fraud, right? Like
Right,
fraud,
right, right, right.
fraud doesn't need AI to exist. Obviously, it's
Okay.
better with AI, but that's sort of like a separate topic. I think that's actually easier for us because we are so primary source oriented,
Got you.
and we're so clear on the reporters and the information that we collect that it's not ambiguous for us where we're credible sources, we're a non-credible sources. I feel like we're not in the business of scrolling Instagram and seeing a reel and saying, oh, I can't tell if this is true or not.
Hmm.
That's not how we get our information, right? And so we don't really have the issue of like not being sure if this is fraudulent or not because we know the limited scope of outlets and sources
Hmm.
that we think and that we consider legitimate, right? And primary sources, there's no fraud there in terms of, if we're taking something from the Supreme Court, we know this is coming from the Supreme Court, we can verify that.
Hmm.
That's the fraud question. But with the AI question, the use we've seen is sort of twofold. Primarily, the journalism industry, the news industry is using AI to help write, help revise, and a lot of it adds noise. It
Hmm.
increases the verbosity. It increases sort of just the real estate, right, to capture your eyeballs, and makes the article longer, right, and maybe makes the first draft of the article and then sends it to your journalist for review, or maybe even does more of that process. But generally, I think of AI as a noise making tool. Obviously, it can be helpful if it's used mindfully, but I think the main risk with AI in the news industry is using it to generate, so to speak, you know, noise
Hmm.
and a lot of sort of generated, like instantly generated articles that are just paraphrasing other articles. And that's just noise making, I don't know, sin.
Hmm.
and and it's eating up the entire industry. We do sort of the opposite. We use AI to denoise and to undo the damage done by the other side. Um, and so that's kind of how I think of these two ways, right? Is one side of the industry is using AI to infuse it with noise.
Hmm.
Our side is using AI to declutter and denoise um, the truth, the article, the content.
Hmm. No, yeah, I got you. So do you see, like, with inform, do you see within the next maybe 5 to 10 years a shift happening in the way that news media is consumed or even put out? Or do you think it kind of will stay traditional as it's always been?
What do you mean by that?
Like what you said, how they kind of rely on fear and anger and biased opinion, so on and so forth. Do you see like what you do with inform.now or anything that might come after you, kind of shifting the landscape of how news media is consumed or even displayed?
I mean, yeah, our whole thesis and project is we're looking to reimagine the news reading habit, right? Is news reading habit right now is very demanding, right? Because you have to go and exert a lot of effort to
Hmm.
figure out where the truth is, to figure out where on the scale of blue and red, where is your purple, and like where do you stand? And it's a very like research heavy experience, right? And you need to really care. And a lot of people wind up resigning from this sort of demanding process. But the news reading habit doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be so laborful. It doesn't have to be so demanding. It doesn't have to be so difficult.
Hmm.
So we're looking to pioneer a new reading habit, essentially, a new news reading habit. And that's what Informed is about. That's what inform.now tries to create. It isn't just a product. It isn't just a platform. It isn't just a community. It isn't just a movement. It's an attempt at a behavior shift. not for every single person in the world, but for people that crave that, people who are yearning for a different way to consume information, an efficient way, a respectful way, a dignified way. And so I definitely believe that it's possible, and we're working on it every single day.
Okay. All right. So I know you said that you got to go. So with respect to your time, I'm gonna get you out of here. But before I get you out of here, I got a couple more questions for you. But before I even get there, do you have any questions for me?
I have been really enjoying this talk, and you know, I'm curious if you could share any more about how do you like. I'm curious to learn more, honestly, about your information intake generally. Like, where did you get your news before you discovered inform.now? And you do you still get your news from like a range of sources, or has it been a bit more focused or consolidated? I'm just curious about like your information diet, so to speak.
Um, well, I think I'm kind of in the majority of people who get their news from social media, generally speaking, or at least in my generation of person. Like we tend to get our news from social media sources or just social media publications. Um, it's not necessarily a thing where we kind of sit in front of the TV and watch Fox News or CNBC or so on and so forth. Even though some people might do that, but definitely social media is probably the biggest form of media intake, not only just for me, but probably my generation as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think part of what we're trying to do is also, I think anyone who's consuming stuff from social media, news related or anything related, is generally aware that like there is no fact checking, right? That
Hmm.
happens on social media, and virality is completely unrelated to factuality.
Right.
So I think in many ways we're trying to also, wake up this realization or idea that you can get all kinds of media from social media.
Yeah.
Don't get your news from there, and that's part of the maybe the behavior shift we're aiming for as well. And so, we'll see. Maybe we can reconnect in some time and see if we've been able to convince you
Oh
to.
yeah. No, yeah, like I said, man, you are more than welcome to come on the HolloTalk podcast again. Like I've really, really enjoyed this conversation and having you on and sharing, what inform.now is and all the information that you shared to the people who may not know what they know now or once they get a chance to listen or see this podcast episode. So thank you for that. Before I have you go, so this is customary to How Tall Podcast. Do you have three gems that you can provide for the people to take away from this conversation, or just three gems in general to apply to their everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't want to digest and interpret our conversation for folks. They can make up their own mind in terms of what they're taking away from this.
Hmm.
But I think, three things that I'm thinking about a lot these days is, and I would, share these thoughts with folks and see if it's helpful. I
Of
think number
course.
one is, you know, are there places in your life where you're a witness or a victim to what we call attention terrorism? And if so, like, you know, can you observe those places and can you pay attention and see, like, do you want to be part of those spaces? And is there anything you want to change? Or do you actually maybe want to limit your exposure or withdraw from spaces that have, attention terrorism behavior, right? Attention hijacking behavior,
Hmm.
attention disrespect. And it can be places in media, but it can also be places elsewhere in your life. And I think that's something that's always sort of my gospel to,
Hmm.
share with people of just being mindful of, is your attention being hijacked? Because your attention is your superpower, and
Yeah.
you should safeguard it as much as you can. Uh, so that's definitely like a big thing that I think about a lot. Um, I think maybe an additional gem just from my personal life and reflections is, if you have any semblance in you or any sort of, any hint even at wanting to build something for people, wanting to build a solution, or some sort of a service, or some sort of a business is a big word, but
Mm-hmm.
build a solution for people to solve a problem. Like, just don't hesitate. Just do it. Your frustration of people that you want to help should be enough motivation for you to just say, you know what, I'm just gonna spend my weekend time, or spend my moonlighting time, just actually working on a solution, right? And I just want to like encourage, I guess,
Yeah.
an entrepreneurial spirit in folks that think they might have it, and just go and do it. Just go and build it. I think that's a prompt that I wish I'd received earlier in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Just go and do it. And so, for anyone who needs to hear this, just go and build the damn thing.
Yeah.
That's
Do
maybe
that shit.
that's
Do
maybe
that shit.
yeah, just do that. Gosh, a third.
Oh, you got a third, Jim. Yeah, we need a third one.
Yeah, be mindful with the media that you take in. It taints your perspective. It influences your mindset. It influences everything more than you realize, more
Mm-hmm.
than you can possibly realize, because a lot of it is so subconscious and spread over a long shelf life, or a long sort of breakdown. What is it called? A long half life. That's what
Mm-hmm.
the radioactive substances in nature, when they break
Yeah,
down, it's called
yeah.
a half life, right? So it has a long half life, and I would just be really mindful, right? If you're watching something and it's absolute brain rot, and not the brain rot that you like,
Mm-hmm.
just have the discipline to quit it right away. Just close it, get out of there, delete the app. Literally, just be really mindful about the media intake, because it defines you, right? It defines who the media you consume defines who you are, and it cannot be understated.
Okay. Well, y'all heard it from the man himself. Okay, so like you said, last thing, and before I get to that, definitely stick around before we, get you out there and everything once we end this. But can you please let the people know where they can find inform.now, and also find you on social media, websites, whatever you got. Just throw it all out there for the people to find.
Yeah, and thank you for that question.
Absolutely.
We're really easy to find. Our website is our brand name, and so if you go to informed.now, you'll get right to the right place, and you can learn more about us and our mission, and what we're doing there. And you can also sign up and see if the type of news that we serve is the type of news you want to consume. If we would be, mindful in your information diet, and so we'd be happy to have any folks who share our mission of news without noise.
Mm-hmm.
That's how to find informed .now. And for me personally, I'm very, very friendly, very open. And so I've been mostly really on LinkedIn these days. And so if you find Kira Shishkin on LinkedIn, I'm the only Kira Shishkin in the world. So there's something cool about that, I guess.
All right.
I'm really easy to find. And, just shoot me a text, shoot me a message. I'm always happy to jam about media mindfulness, and the work we're doing with Informed.now.
Okay. Is that all you want to say about inform.now and yourself?
I think so. Am I missing something?
Oh no, I'm just asking. I'm just asking. Just in case you're not wanting to give you the opportunity to say it if you didn't say it.
Well, no, I appreciate it. I think that's it. We keep things very simple.
Okay. All right. Just like inform.now. Okay, so thank you so much, man. I really, really appreciate you, and thank you to all the information that you gave, because it was very, very valuable information. I think people would definitely take, heed to the things that we talked about here today. So, Kira Shishkin, thank you for coming on the HolloTalk Podcast and talking to me, Jetpack Nick. And I also want to thank all the HolloTalk Podcast listeners and supporters for supporting us through and through. Thank you, sir. Peace and love, y'all.